Well, hello everyone. It's a new platform. I hope it's working. Please let me know. Post if you would. Somebody, how's the audio? How's the video? No way of knowing. But that said, we're going to get started, and we're going to certainly take questions if this allows me to do so. It's kind of a new platform. Again, we don't know. So I've had some very interesting questions over the past couple of days about a couple of ideas. Certainly one that is interesting is how taking Viagra might now have some, oh good, thank you Denise for that, might be a good thing. And I'll tell you where that came from. There is a study being championed by the Massachusetts General Hospital where they are giving nitrous oxide inhalational form to patients in the hospital with COVID-19 to see if it modifies the virus and its expression. That study is posed to be completed in 1 year, at least in terms of the recruitment, if you look at their patients they're recruiting for this. So having said that, we know that there is some interface with Viagra and nitric oxide, NO, and therefore people are talking about this. There's a lot more to learn. So we'll be seeing how that plays out. And I'm going to need to get used to this new platform. Facebook just, I don't know if it's good or bad, but threw a curveball here. So I don't know what's going on. But nonetheless, let's move on as if this is really happening in a good way. I'm seeing comments, so we look good. The first place I want to go to is the relationship between hypertension and having a bad outcome. And also, in addition, I don't see where I'm supposed to post this. Oh, here we go. Comment as David Perlmutter. Here we go. Things are new. I'm teaching old dog new tricks. So I just posted that, and the idea is has to do with what are called the ACE-2 receptors. Sounds complicated, but this is the name of the receptor on our cells where the virus binds. So it's called the ACE-2 receptor. So the logical question was, would there be any advantage or risk for people who are taking drugs that block this ACE-2 receptor or that block an enzyme that's involved in angiotensin converting enzyme? That's what ACE stands for. And people have speculated, hey, we should put everybody on ACE-2 receptors or ACE-2 receptor blockers. That would be a good thing, or may not be. And I want to walk you through it. What I just posted was a study that starts off by saying that here are the most common comorbidities of people with coronavirus issues. Number one, 30% is hypertension, high blood pressure. Why that is, we don't know. Is it because hypertension is an independent risk factor, or is it because people with hypertension oftentimes have other what we call comorbidities, other things going along, like obesity, at least overweight, sedentary, meaning they don't do much movement, etc. Number two is diabetes at 19%. Number three, coronary artery disease at 8%. Now, when looking at the people who have COVID-19 who develop the acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS, which is that's when generally you need to be put on a ventilator because your lungs begin to fail, the numbers are actually quite similar. Of those who develop ARDS, respiratory syndrome, acute respiratory syndrome, 27% have, going into it, hypertension, diabetes around 20%, cardiovascular disease 6%. Let me continue on this whole notion of these ACE-2 drugs. Frequently, people are already on these angiotensin-related drugs when they develop COVID-19, go into the hospital. And there hasn't been any real evidence that they are somewhat protected or that they do worse. We know that these drugs do have some mild anti-inflammatory play. And as such, it was thought that perhaps that might prove to be beneficial, but thus far it is not. One of the concerns is if you block the ACE-2 receptor, hey, you think that's great because now you're blocking the receptor where the virus wants to bind. Well, that's a great idea. But what typically happens in our cells is when we block something, more of that appears. So you block a receptor and more of the receptor then appears looking for what it wants to bind to. So that could have gone both ways. Let me read to you the conclusion of the study that you will find on drperlmutter.com, although I just sent you the link just now. In conclusion, there is as yet no evidence that hypertension in and of itself, I added that, is related to outcomes of COVID-19, or that ACE inhibitor or ACE receptor blocker drugs is harmful or, for that matter, beneficial during the treatment of COVID-19. Use of these agents should be maintained for controlling blood pressure, and they should not be discontinued, at least on the basis of current evidence at this time. I guess that's a bit redundant, current evidence at this time, but nonetheless, the recommendation is if you're on an ACE-2 blocker or ACE-2 inhibitor, don't come off of it. And there's no evidence to support necessarily putting people on the ACE-2 related drugs as some kind of treatment in hopes of a better outcome. The next thing that I would like to publish to you right now, and it's also found on drperlmutter.com, is a discussion of this ivermectin drug. We've had a lot of people commenting about this, and I want to comment on that if I could. People saying, well, because they're hearing about ivermectin because of a study that came out of Australia. And I would say that, last night I happened to review where our viewers are of these podcasts. Number one city was New York. Number two, Melbourne. So welcome all of our followers in Australia. Thank you for spending time with us. Let's go back to the ivermectin story. So what is ivermectin? Ivermectin is a drug that's been around quite a long time, and it's used to treat things like worm infections, parasitic infections like worms, and also used for head lice in terms of being used topically. We use it here in America for head lice. It's also used for helminth. Those are worm infections. And a study was just published that I gave to you coming out of Australia from Melbourne that has demonstrated that this anti-parasitic drug dramatically basically destroys this virus within 48 hours. The study was headed by a Dr. Kylie Wagstaff, and she led the study, and it stopped SARS-CoV-2 virus growing in cell culture within 48 hours. Now, I posted some of the charts from this study last evening. You'll see them on Facebook. But let's talk for a minute before you review those. Here is, let me repeat that. It stopped SARS-CoV-2 virus growing in cell culture within 48 hours. What I just said, I think, is really important. The specific part about growing in cell culture, meaning this is not a study in humans. It's a study in a laboratory. And it was dramatic, what it did. But it doesn't mean that it does so in humans. What we do know, and then I'll read a little bit more from the study, what we do know is that ivermectin has been used for a long time in humans, again, for the treatments that I described earlier, so that it would be readily available. We know its safety profile. It's not perfect, that's for sure. There are issues related, especially to overdosage. Generally, in the treatment of worm infestation, it's one pill. And again, the safety profile is described. You can read about that on drugs.com or wherever you like to go. So that's something to think about. I wouldn't think it's reasonable to rush out and buy ivermectin right now, just like I don't think it's reasonable to run out and have your doctor order you hydroxychloroquine until we get more data. And so there isn't, to my knowledge, a study yet being done on the treatment of humans with COVID-19 using ivermectin. But if we look at what the heck is going on in the laboratory, it's pretty darn exciting. Quote, "We found that even a single dose could essentially remove all viral RNA by 48 hours, and that even at 24 hours, there was a really significant reduction in it," said Dr. Wagstaff. And again, ivermectin is already an FDA-approved anti-parasitic drug, and it's been used, as mentioned, in the treatment of parasites, but also in the treatment of viruses like HIV, dengue, influenza, and was even used during the Zika virus outbreak. So we need to look at the bullet points. Number one, a single treatment was able to effect a 5,000-fold reduction in virus at 48 hours, importantly, in cell culture. Number two, ivermectin is an FDA-approved drug for parasite infections and therefore is available for repurposing or off-label use, as it were, and that would be available actually quite quickly. I would guess there's probably a lot of ivermectin available around the world. And finally, as I just mentioned that, it is widely available because it's included in the World Health Organization's list of what are called essential medications. So this is a drug available around the world that, for today, folks, is really aggressively effective at getting rid of this virus in the laboratory. We will await human trials to see if that's something that is something we should be looking at. Okay, let me take some. Elizabeth Nelson, I use ivermectin for my rosacea. It comes as a cream, works on my rosacea. I'm on hydroxychloroquine for my rheumatoid arthritis. Read this morning there's this shortage for rheumatoid arthritis patients. That's correct. And we certainly want to avoid that as it relates to ivermectin. This follower is using ivermectin as a cream for rosacea, yet another of its purposes, and calls to our attention the fact that here is a patient on Plaquenil or hydroxychloroquine for the treatment of her rheumatoid arthritis, and now she's having difficulty finding it because people have been getting it somehow and depleting pharmacies of hydroxychloroquine. And again, there's no real good data indicating that this is truly effective. Any news for type 1 diabetes, age 60? I would indicate that type 1 autoimmune diabetes has been listed as a predisposition for a worse outcome. Age 60 and above, like me, we're in also a higher risk category and therefore need to be super careful. Okay. Hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin are both off patents. That's why they don't want you to know they work, inexpensive and not profitable. That may be the case. I, with all due respect, am not really interested in fanning those flames, but thank you for your comment. Ivermectin is a prescription only, at least in America. I don't know this to be true, but I would expect likely that ivermectin in India and probably Mexico are available without a prescription. Many people seem to be using topical ivermectin. I don't know if that will work. I don't even know if oral ivermectin will work. Only what we've talked about thus far, Ronald, I'll talk about quercetin in a moment. What we've talked about thus far is the ivermectin given by mouth or other method, but not topical. So we'll comment on Ronald Sanders' question about quercetin. Quercetin, a bioflavonoid, it does act mildly as what we call a senolytic, does help to rid our bodies of less effective older immune cells and allows us to repopulate with younger cells. A far better choice is the flavonoid that is called fisetin, F as in Frank, Isetin. Good morning, Barbara. Nice to see you. Okay. Could the BCG TB vaccine prove somehow protective against COVID-19? Interesting thought. There is actually research that is looking at that. And so I don't have much news on that as yet. Please remind people not to self-treat with their pets' ivermectin. That's a very good point. Thank you for that. Ivermectin is used quite aggressively, not only in pets, but also in farm animals, things like horses and cows, etc. You are absolutely not hearing me say that taking ivermectin is a good idea. And by all means, I wouldn't even consider taking your pet's medication under any circumstance. Now we learned from Mexico, from Diana, that indeed ivermectin is available in Mexico without a prescription. Again, I'm not saying that it is necessarily something that we should be doing as yet. Okay. Is there quercetin in orange pulp? I believe there is. How much there is, certainly don't know. Um, yes. Thoughts on oil of oregano? Oregano as an antiviral. People have been talking about that for a long time. I ran into somebody recently outside who was using oil of oregano on her face mask. And I didn't think that was a good idea because, again, we don't want oils and fats to be used on our masks, on our faces, etc., when we have the possibility of exposure. Why? Because the virus itself is enveloped in fat or lipid. And as such, an oil might be a great place to let it continue to do its thing. That's why we want to use soap, because it breaks up oil. It breaks up the fat layer that surrounds the virus. It's why we want to wash our hands with a lot of soap and a lot of scrubbing. Let's change the terrain instead of chasing a cure, Daniel. I'm not sure what that means, but I think that's probably playing defense. I think we need to do both. I mean, I think we need to play defense and hope that our scientists will develop something that will then cure it, because otherwise we're just playing defense and not able to get back into society and do the things that we want to do. Now, I want to tell you all that last evening I posted a graph, and the graph, if you look at it, was of the new cases in Italy. I happened to have checked that this morning, and the trend continues. It looks like when you look at countries like Italy and Germany and Spain and France, and even to some degree the United States, that the number of new cases may actually be declining. There is going to be a lag between what we do from a behavior perspective and the manifestation with less new cases. The point is, it looks like we're starting to see some evidence that our change in behavior, our limiting of our contact with other people, risk of exposure, is working. So don't expect there to be changes the next day because people have suddenly started wearing masks or suddenly taken to heart the idea of social distancing. It will take some time. Death rates in America continue to rise. And, that is certainly, there's no difficulty in looking at that metric in terms of it being valid. You don't need a test for that metric. You do need a test for determining the number of people who have positive COVID-19. I mean, that's where those numbers come from. Also, having said that, I discussed this the other day, we're seeing now the release by the FDA, fast-tracked, the antibody testing that we were hoping was going to happen, talked about it, testing both IgM and IgG antibodies, now becoming widely available around the country. That is not an indication that a person does have the virus active in him or her, or does not. It simply shows the person obviously has had exposure and does have antibodies. I will indicate that there is a risk of what we call false positive, meaning the test shows positive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the person has had a COVID-19 reaction, because it can be false positive from previous coronavirus infections. Please understand that we've had coronavirus infections for decades. I mean, it was discovered in 1960s. We saw it a lot in our pediatrics rotations 30 years ago, or 35, however many years ago I was in medical school. And it wasn't that uncommon. It just, the severity of this event is what we're talking about right now. We are social distancing in British Columbia and flattening the curve. Yes. I love that. I'm hoping to get up to British Columbia sometime this summer. Love being up there in the summertime. I wish you had closed caption. Tell that to Facebook. That would be awesome. Awesome if we could do that. Okay. Let me just see. It's possible to have mild COVID symptoms for 3 or 4 weeks. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be severe. You can have zero symptoms for 3 or 4 weeks, carry the virus, transmit the virus to others, and never know it. That's why we need to have access to this testing. And that's why the antibody testing, now becoming widely available, is going to be so important. Let me tell you, if you see anything on television or read anything about the testing that uses your blood, it's a small pipette, takes a little drop of blood or a lancet, and then test that in a machine, tells you if you're IgG or IgM positive, then that is the test that we're talking about. All right, let me see if there are any other questions, and then we'll take it from there. Follow-up on question. A Canadian researcher said it is thought to prevent virus from attaching to the ACE site. I'd like to see that. We'll take a look at that, Ronald Sanders. Maybe if you can find the actual research and then post that as a link, that would be really helpful, and we would all appreciate that. That might be yet another powerful reason to consider quercetin and perhaps other flavonoids. Thank you, Kimberly Mardero, for your nice comments for that. I was thinking this morning that this is going to be over. Who knows when? When it's all said and done, might be something to ask yourself, well, what did I accomplish during that period of time? Might be another month, might be another 3 months, who knows? So what do you have to show for it? What did you do? Did you stay in shape? Did you learn another language? Who knows what people do? Write a book, meditate, and just enjoy life. All those things. This is actually some valuable time in some regards, even though it's absolutely a pain in the butt. It is, and scary to some degree, it is valuable time. How much time do we have? So what is the safe dosage of vitamin C, and can it help prevent or treat? Second part of your question, I cannot answer. Don't know that yet. Safe dosage is certainly unclear. I take 1,000 milligrams a day of C with bioflavonoids, but many people take a lot more. Many integrative doctors push vitamin C to much higher dosages to what we call bowel tolerance, meaning keep increasing the dosage until your stools become loose. At that point, you back down a little bit. I don't know if there's merit to that, into having high dosages. We do know that there is a trial underway with intravenous vitamin C. Where that goes, we don't know. Weather is changing. That was a mention, and that might be something that's responsible for these possibly positive trends that we are seeing. Again, I wish I had closed caption. I don't know how to make that happen. If somebody knows how to make that happen, I would love to know. All right. So somebody says, my doctor sent me a hydroxychloroquine prescription. Well, that's interesting. I choose not to think that's necessarily appropriate at this stage of the game. And a lot of comments that people seem to like this time of day better than later in the day. And have I seen much about THC and CBD quelling cytokine storm? Don't know the answer to that. It would probably be more the CBD, the cannabidiol, than the THC in terms of cytokine storm. But typically, people who are going to experience cytokine storm are already in the hospital. Sure, it can happen at home, in which case, hopefully you can get to a hospital. But would CBD work in that regard? Don't know the answer. We do know that CBD does have some modest anti-inflammatory activity and some anti-anxiety activity as well, both of which might be positive at a time like this. And so the idea that you would get CBD in the hospital, I think we're a ways from that. Margaret Ashley says, thank you for putting a stent in my husband. That might not have been me, or likely was not me. Thoughts on metformin? Does it have upper respiratory side effects? Interesting question, Joanne Sintic. Thoughts on metformin? Wow. So metformin is probably the most common anti-diabetic drug used for type 2 diabetes. Glucophage is the name many of you may be familiar with. And that's a very interesting question because does it have respiratory side effects? That's probably likely. But I'm going to tell you why that question is actually far more insightful, perhaps, Joanne, than you may know, but maybe you know this. And that is metformin works on something called AMP kinase, and as such does also feed into this pathway of autophagy, of allowing our bodies to rid themselves of older cells and older cellular components, and allows for rejuvenation. It's the reason that metformin is being looked upon as an anti-aging drug. I was part of a committee, anti-aging committee that met last year in California with researchers from around the world. And I was very taken by the fact that a lot of these people, smart people, were taking metformin. I think that they weren't fully embracing side effects or the possibility and taking it based upon the AMP kinase chemistry that has to do with anti-aging. So what I'm saying is that metformin, in a way, works like quercetin, works like fisetin. If you read about senolytics, Senolytics, should I type that one in? If you look at senolytics, you will see, I tell you what, I've actually posted this on drperlmutter.com in the coronavirus section. I published a whole review of senolytics. You'll see metformin is listed. Okay, let me take a couple more questions, and then we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Let's see. Anything else pressing? Okay, what was the question? Metformin is terrible for your gut and microbiome, correct? I think any drug is potentially damaging to your gut bacteria, and I can't imagine metformin wouldn't likely impart some changes. The issue would be how dramatic or dangerous are those changes. Knowing what I know about metformin, I do not take it, that's for sure. I don't take any pharmaceutical, not that I wouldn't if I needed to. But I have generally very low blood sugar to start off with. I mean, sometimes my fasting blood sugar is in the mid-60s, so I wouldn't want anything that would necessarily lower my blood sugars. Okay, well, everybody, I appreciate all the great comments today. One question about hydroxychloroquine and African Americans. Let me address, if I may. About 10% to a third of African Americans have a unique issue. It's something called glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Wow. And what does that mean? It means an enzyme difference in their livers and how their livers handle certain things. One of the things of concern has been, do people who have glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase issues, would they be threatened by hydroxychloroquine or Plaquenil? I actually researched that last night and found that it does not look like people with G6-PDH have any increased risk if they take hydroxychloroquine. I am not saying that hydroxychloroquine is a treatment as yet and should be taken. All right, I'm going to see how I can end our video and not lose it. We'll take it from there. Thank you all for your time. I so enjoy interfacing with everybody, socially connecting, although we are certainly socially distanced. And I will talk to you all tomorrow. Probably looks like around 10 or 11 a.m. Eastern, if that seems to be what everybody likes. Bye for now.